All right, good afternoon. It's Friday afternoon, right before happy hour, so I hope I can entertain you at least a little bit. Quick updates. I know you've seen a lot of updates already, but I want to focus on some user examples, actual users of the Filecoin network. But before we do that, quick high-level overview. We all know it's a huge market that we go after. You've heard from JV, specifically what we're doing, what the master plan is. But 24% CAGR. We hope we can capture some of that. And to get there, as we said, we need to scale Web3. And you've seen a lot and heard a lot from JV on how we're doing that. Now, we believe that Filecoin today is the scalable data storage layer for Web3, because if you look back at what happened in the last 2.5 years since we went mainnet, we've actually adopted a ton of storage providers. The network actually exists of more than 3,600 storage providers, and across 44 different countries. We're seeing growth in emerging countries from the Middle East to India to South Africa, Latin America. So it's really exciting to see that in just a matter of a year, we actually have seen a ton of interest also from these emerging countries that have sort of come to the table by themselves and are organizing, self-organizing events in these locations. Now, what has happened in the last year is that initially we started as a network of miners, and we sort of evolved over time to a proliferation of multiple providers. We rebranded the word miners 2 years ago to storage providers. And since then, we have seen an ecosystem of types of providers come to our network. So for example, last year, we did not have data preparers. We did not have data onboarders or sealing providers. So you look at the middle there from the yellow and the gray bars, those were not here. They didn't exist. And so they started to evolve as more data started to be onboarded onto the network. And those are very focused entities, businesses, that really zoom in on how data should be prepared, and they actually help bring that data onto the network, and they build a business on it, and they actually get paid in tokens. In the last year, we've also seen an incremental adoption of, or we've seen a lot more storage provider systems starting to store data. So as you can see, February 2022, we had a very less than 3% in the beginning of 2022 was actually storing data. Today, we're already at 21%. Actually, these slides are a month old, so it's probably even higher. I should update these every single day. So really good signs in the sense that we're seeing a transition, because if you look at where we want to get to, we want to move to utility. We want to demonstrate utility, and demonstrating utility is done by actually storing data onto the network and users paying for storing that data. So we're making a ton of progress. Of course, Filecoin is still extremely small if you look at the total data that's being generated. Because this week, we were talking to an integrator, and they asked me, but is there really room for Filecoin in this world? Because there's all these cloud providers, and there's so much storage being sold. But if you look at these numbers, this year alone, analysts predict that 120 zettabytes of data will be generated, and only 3.5 zettabytes is actually being stored. And why is that? Why is only 3.5 zettabytes being stored? Because that's the budget they have. And also, there's only so many drives that are being manufactured by the two largest drive manufacturers that are still in this world, where one of them I used to work for. And they look at revenue, margin, and so they will always optimize for themselves, not necessarily for the world. So there's a big opportunity for us to go after that. So why are businesses using Filecoin, right? I get that question a lot too, because now that we're moving into Web 2, we already have a ton of Web 3 users. We are actually looking at what are sort of the key differentiators that users care about when they use a decentralized storage network. Well, one is lowering storage costs, but obviously storage cost, even if it's 95% cheaper today, and we know that's not going to last, right? It's only for those early movers that are going to take advantage of these huge discounted prices. It is not the only reason, and it should not be the only reason that users are interested in our platform. And fortunately, it isn't. So a lot of users are actually very interested in the ability to store multiple copies. Having a disaster recovery backup implementation or infrastructure that allows them to control where the data is being stored, whether it's within country or sometimes they need multiple copies for redundancy, and so we provide that because in our network, it's an open source stack, and you don't negotiate with one single entity. You can actually negotiate with multiple storage providers and negotiate price and flexibility. So you have leverage as an end user. Third is the, there we go, we go back. So third is the content-driven data addressing, meaning the CIDs. So as you know, we use to address data on the Filecoin network. It's just like IPFS, because it's built on IPFS. You use a content hash, and that content hash is unique. And that gives you a lot of benefits, because if you know the hash, if you can retrieve that data through that hash without needing to know where the data is actually stored, you now have a lot more flexibility, meaning you're not really tied into the original application that stored the data in a certain specific format. No. There is one single key. There's one single unique hash that does represent that data, and that can be used to retrieve that data. And so it's extremely important. And definitely, if you look at the fact that we're using that cryptographic hashing to verify the data on a daily basis. So if you're storing data for like multiple years, let's say, you want to be sure that the data that you stored is still the same data that you originally submitted. So we guarantee the data integrity through these verifies or through these cryptographic hashes. And that is extremely important. And it allows us to provide this immutable and verifiable storage platform, which is what a lot of researchers, scientists today value. And so that's what you'll see in some of the use cases that is called out as a big differentiator. Okay, so geographical distribution, we already talked about it. It's definitely like now it's Europe also approving MiCA. We are hoping that we're going to see some interest there too, because in those areas, data sovereignty is really taken seriously, and having the ability to store data within a certain region, like the geofencing essentially, is super important. So you have that capability with Filecoin. And last but not least, we also have a Filecoin Green initiative, which is all about tracking energy consumption. So we are very big on that. We want to make this carbon neutral or carbon negative over time. So it's a huge initiative that we're driving with our storage provider ecosystem. All right, so who is using Filecoin today? And I'm specifically zooming in on kind of a mix of Web3 and Web2, but I want to call out a few. Because last year we didn't have by any means so many logos. And if you want to know more, go to filecoin-explorer.com, where you'll see all the logos. But we have more than 1,466 unique client addresses and 851 petabytes of data stored. And on a daily basis, we're actually storing around 4 to 5 petabytes of data worldwide, and it's growing. So knowing that last year, we were probably onboarding less than a PIB. And so we had like around 20 PIBs of data. So we've accelerated data onboarding process. And that is because we have incentives that incentivize our storage providers 10 times more. If they store real data, if they store data, they get 10 times more block rewards essentially than storing just providing capacity. So as JV was saying, initial phase, we were onboarding capacity. Now we're focusing on onboarding real data. And there's some interesting logos in there. So this is sort of a graph from the last year, where you can see on the left, we are seeing an increase in data onboarders coming to our network. So unique addresses, unique data onboarders that are moving data into the network. Unique addresses, and also the middle graph shows you red is like, the redder it is, more red it is, the larger the data set is. So you see larger data sets come onto the network. And then on the right, you'll actually see the graph over time, where we were less than 1 PIB a day to right now 4 to 5 PIB and growing. So this is great. And here's some logos as well, like UCS, the USC Shoah Foundation, Generate, Berkeley. You can see CERN, Project Atlas at CERN. They did a public PR announcement around that. So again, very large logos are coming to our network, and we're very excited about that, which we want to build on this year. So other questions we get, and I thought this was interesting to share, is what type of data sets do we see? So we first and foremost see a lot of public data sets, because that's what we focused on. And you see that the climate data sets, you see all sorts of research data set that's being onboarded, and that's very useful for machine learning scientists or business intelligence engineers that want to use these data sets. So we're seeing quite a wide variation, but overall, we're seeing a lot of research, environmental information, and life sciences. And we'll continue. By the way, all of this is public, so we are very transparent. These are data sets that have been onboarded primarily by our storage provider. So what we've seen in the last year is that this onboarding is coming from storage providers that reached out to their clients, are working with their end customers, and bringing those data sets onto the network. And then you can see here by region as well, it's sort of like a lot of data is coming from the dark one. The dark color is North America, seeing definitely growth in North America, and Asia, and uncategorized. So there's some data sets that we don't know exactly where they're coming from, even though we're asking for it. So because it's a permissionless network, anyone can just add data to the network. So it's coming from all over the world. A couple of other things that I want to call out. If you look at where the applications, what the duration is. So when we did analysis of the data cap is our, basically what we allocate when applications get submitted on GitHub. So you have to submit for this data cap allocation, and you have to share with us your attention, the location, the size, the application, and so on. And I thought this was interesting to show because currently, and maybe it's a little small, but these different types of blue screens, you'll see that the majority, 35% is storing or is looking at a retention for 1 to 5 to 2 years, and then 30% is between 2 and 3 years. We are seeing some data sets, like around 5% that are coming in that want to store data permanently, which is interesting. And now we're going to start monitoring and see if we're seeing an increase in some of these retentions. But again, great and healthy retention levels here, because we were, you don't want it to be like 6 months or a year. You want it to be long term, because that means that users that are coming to our network and storing data on our network are committed for the long term to store data and use Filecoin for, as you can see, 1 to 3 years. Second is if we break down the retrieval requirements, because we are predominantly right now, Filecoin is more of an archive repository, and now we're improving with CDN capabilities, with pinning capabilities, and so on, the performance, the retrieval performance. So if you look at the breakdown of the retrieval frequency, you can see that the majority is like yearly, monthly, and sporadic. So if you look at, that's the 38% on the bottom is yearly, so that's sort of like that purple graph, and then monthly is like the darker blue, and then sporadic is sort of like the turquoise or whatever you call it. So again, very much of an indicator of the performance of the Filecoin network, which is predominantly archive focused at this stage. So it's very aligned with the data sets and the application retrieval requirements that are coming in. Here, I wanted to call out too, because we asked the question, like, where is this data coming from today? And so we're seeing a ton of data coming from 22.52% is coming from own storage infrastructure on premises. So this is within their own data centers. And then 69% is coming from Amazon, right? And I think this is also because a lot of public data sets today have been scraped from Amazon and have been moved into Filecoin, so that you can now get access to these public data sets through the Filecoin interface. All right, so in general, what resonates with customers, before I'm going to give a few examples, is the egress cost. So today, if you're storing data in the public cloud vendors, probably most of you know this, but it's easy to store data in the cloud. It's basically free to move it in, but it's extremely expensive to get that data back. So if one day you decide to, like, you know what, I'm going to change clouds, or I'm going to pull that data back and I'm going to move it into my on-premises system, you could be ending up with multiple $100,000 bills. And so this is how these hyperscalers are getting you. So a lot of enterprises are feeling that pain. And so with the Filecoin interface, with the Filecoin network, you don't have those challenges because you're negotiating that with the storage provider itself. There's a few other ones. 53% of enterprises were unable to use public cloud as data storage due to regulatory compliance. So we have seen areas where Amazon or Google does not have a presence, and that's where Filecoin, you can spin up a Filecoin system as a storage provider, and you can offer a local service there. And then geographical distribution seems to be more and more important, and geofencing. So here's a few examples University of Utah, in the last year, has been storing 200 terabytes of the NASA climate data sets. And what's really important there is that this is the year of science, definitely in the US, open science. And so when scientists receive a grant, they're required to make that data public. And a lot of these data sets are still locked in on a local device, local NAS server. And so here's a way for these climate data sets to be made public through the Filecoin network. And so the other benefit here is that all the researchers now have access to it. It's distributed on a neutral, decentralized network. So there's a link. Actually, there's a PR about this, and you can actually find the link where you can see all these beautiful graphs. Second is CERN Atlas project. This is much bigger. It's 10 petabytes of the Hydra Collider. That is some research data sets are being stored. There, what was important is disaster recovery, but also the immutability. So the fact that they would be guaranteed that the data that is stored through these verifiable hashes that I explained earlier, and the integrity checking that's happening on a daily basis, was super important for them, so that they could point to the originals and could make sure that, yep, this is indeed the original backup and content that I protected. Third is with the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately, these war crimes it's necessary for us to document these, and so the Starling Lab has done a fantastic job in working with local researchers, not local research, but local people in the field to capture the data sets or capture the war crimes and make sure that they are stored on Filecoin in a tamper-resistant way, so that you can guarantee that it wasn't fake, it was the original from the device, all the way from the device. They do cryptographic hashes, and actually pull that in and store that on-chain, so that you can go on-chain, you can actually verify end-to-end where the picture was taken, by who it was taken, and there's a standard as well that verifies that it is a legit image and it gets stored in Filecoin in an immutable way. So again, what are we focusing on for, and I know I have only like a minute left, but what are we focusing on now for this year is, we want to build on all this success. Obviously, huge logos. This is just a start, because last year we didn't have these examples. We didn't have all this data that was onboarded. This year, we're focusing on quality, improving the user utilization, like the utility of the network, the usability of the user's experience, and driving more high-quality use cases and data sets so that we can demonstrate the real network utility of Filecoin. And so the way we're doing that is we're doing it direct through direct and relationships with partners or customers, but that's not really scalable. We like networking effects, and so we started a Decentralized Storage Alliance 6 months ago, where we invite every large entity, Web2 entity that wants to move into Web3 and wants to help us advocate the decentralized storage stack into the Web2 world. And so we started with AMD, Seagate, Ernst & Young, and we have a ton of integrators that are very interested in collaborating with us. So much that we have to scale it back a little bit and really be specific on with who we want to work. But in general, we're looking for more partners, and obviously we're doing that through our storage provider ecosystem. But it's awesome to see these major logos to collaborate with us and telling that story to those CIOs, CTOs, and so on. So I invite everyone here in the room to help us with this. And if you want to reach out to us, oops, I see there's some screw up with the slide, but if you want to reach out to us, this is how you can connect with us. I invite everyone to collaborate and engage on our Slack channels or here in the room. So thank you very much for those who have helped build this network. There's so much more to build, but I want to continue to build on the success. So thank you very much.